So today I wanted to have a conversation with you because I wanted to talk about DCP&P, DYFUS. I wanted to talk to an expert, someone who has experience, so that we could see if we could, share some information to the people about DYFUS, also known as DCP&P. I'd like to start off by giving an introduction that your name is Octavia Melendez. You used to be a judge on the Vicinage 4 Superior Court in New Jersey, and you served on the Family Division. You have a great deal of experience with DCP&P, especially because you used to be a DAG.
I was for 21 years.
Wow. And you also were a judge.
That's correct. And I did DCP&P cases for 8 of the 10 years that I sat on the bench.
Wow. Wow. So you've seen it from all angles, right?
And actually, the first year out of law school, I was a pool attorney doing DCP&P cases before I went to the Attorney General's office. Mm-hmm. And I've come full circle. I am back representing parents again.
Okay. Okay. So we hear a lot of people talk about DCP&P. Some people say DYFUS. What is the appropriate term?
Well, actually, the legislature changed the name of it. But my theory, and this happened while I was still on the bench, my theory is arose by any other name. Mm-hmm. We've called it DYFUS. People are going to refer to it as DYFUS. It's known as DYFUS. DCP&P is the correct name for it. You can call it the division. You can call it DYFUS. I think that most people know it by DYFUS. It's the most common name, even years after, because it's been about 10 years since the name was changed.
What is DYFUS? What is it?
DYFUS is the agency. It's the sole agency of the government that's in charge of protecting children, and it's in charge of investigating all referrals that come in. They are mandated by law that whenever they have reason to believe that a child is abused or neglected, they must respond to the call.
So let's say, for example, someone sees something that they don't like, right? They believe there may be an issue. There's a number that a person can call and report somebody for abuse or anything like that?
That is correct. And many of the calls are legitimate calls. Sometimes the calls are not legitimate calls. Sometimes it's an angry neighbor that makes a phone call. Sometimes it could be an ex-partner, an ex-spouse, another parent, or an in-law that's making the phone calls. But notwithstanding the legitimacy of the call itself, the division has to go out and investigate.
Now, what's an investigation? So we hear about these types of investigations, but what does it mean? So let's start from the beginning. So let's say they find out that a disgruntled neighbor, or maybe there is actually a misunderstanding. Or let's say, for example, the child goes to school with a mark or a bruise, and DYFUS gets involved. From the perspective of the parent or the person who has custody of the child, what's that experience like?
Well, it can be very devastating for a parent. Mm-hmm. It certainly is difficult under the best of circumstances. If the parent has not done anything, if it's somebody that's making the phone call without a basis for it, the parent then has to deal with the division becoming involved and trying to find out whether the child or children are okay. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, even if the allegations that are made are accurate, then the parent has to deal with the division or DYFUS to do whatever is necessary to make that child safe. That's why it's really important that the moment that a parent hears from the division, that they contact our office and so that we can walk them through, so that we can give them direction, so that we can help them. Because having seen these cases from all angles, and I'm not the only attorney on the firm that does this, you know that. I mean, since I am a retired judge, I cannot appear in court. I can't sign documents. I work behind the scenes with the attorneys that do these cases. But we certainly have Afonso, and we have Eric Foley. And Eric Foley has many years of experience, both as a DAG and as an attorney representing the parents. And Al has had, I have known Al since we were both attorneys way back when he first started practicing. So he has many years of experience in this. So it's important that parents contact us so that we can give them some guidance in terms of how to work through the system, so that we can shortcut and get DYFUS out of their lives if there's no need for it. If there is the type of case where there's a need for services, to make sure that they get the services quickly, because the clock starts ticking. If the division removes children from the care of parents, there is a clock that ticks, and after a year, a permanent plan has to be made. So you need people that know the system to make the system work for them.
Okay. So it sounds like if DYFUS is involved, if DCP&P is involved in your life, it sounds like one of the most important things you can do is reach out to an attorney who can help you navigate through the process.
Absolutely. That's the first thing that should be done before you go ahead and let them, ask questions, talk to people without really knowing what to do or how to handle it. Now, I have to, there has to be a caveat here, which is if a parent refuses to talk to the division, and the division, as I've said before, is mandated to investigate, the division may very well take the case to court for a judge to make a determination whether the division has to investigate or not. That's called, they go in and request an order to investigate, forcing them to talk to the division, or forcing the parent to allow the child to be interviewed by the division. And that's also very important, that if you receive any court papers, you immediately contact. If you haven't contacted them before, if you receive papers indicating that you have a court date, that you have, don't wait till the last minute to contact somebody. And by all means, do not go in there alone.
What are some mistakes that a parent or someone who has custody of a child, what are some potential mistakes someone could make with DYFUS? Is it saying too much? Is it letting them have access to things without, just really creating a division between them and the whoever's investigating?
Each case is different. And I've said this from day one, in all the years of my practice, both as an attorney, as a judge, I always said, oh, I thought I had seen it all. And then I saw something new. So each case is different. It's hard to say what's the biggest mistake that people make. But one of them is, in fact, divulging information that can be perceived as something that is against the parent, and the parent not knowing that they're doing that. They may be saying something that's harmful to them and not realize that that's what they're doing. Once you talk to them and you tell them something, then they're going to follow up with what you've told them, even if what you've told them is not exactly. For example, they'll talk to you at the hospital. If you take a child to the hospital and the hospital calls it in, the division will go to the hospital to talk to you. And I don't have to say how stressful it is to have a child in a hospital and to be there. And then you say something there that maybe was not exactly what happened.
Yeah. So obviously, as attorneys, we know that different courts have different standards, right? Family court, there's one standard. Criminal court, there's one standard. For the people who may be watching this video who don't understand the standard, explain what's the difference between reasonable doubt in a criminal setting and the standard in a DYFUS setting, in a
Okay.
DCP&P setting?
You mean in terms of a burden of proof?
Yes.
Okay. In a criminal matter, you have to, the case has to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt. And what that means is that it's not that there's no doubt at all, it's that a reasonable person would not have a doubt that this in fact occurred. Mm-hmm. In a DYFUS case, if it's the abuse or neglect case, it's by a preponderance of the evidence. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that it's more likely than not that it occurred. So if you were to have a scale, and all you have to do is tip it, okay, in order to, in an abuse or neglect case, for the state to prove its case.
Okay.
But the burden is on the state. The burden is not on the parent. The burden is on the state. The burden does not shift to the parent except in one particular type of case. And there's a lot of nuances to that case, of that type of case. It's when there's multiple possible perpetrators, okay, that the burden may shift.
I remember as a younger person, sometimes people would make jokes and say, oh, you know, if your parent raises a hand on you, you can call DYFUS on your parent. Or, you know, kids would say, you know, oh, yeah, you know, so-and-so is going to call DYFUS on, you know, so-and-so. Yeah. People would play around with these terms without really knowing what they mean. But from your perspective, when it comes to corporal punishment, so what's the deal? Is corporal punishment out loud? Is it something that is it illegal to do? If someone accuses someone of, you know, disciplining their child physically, what should they be aware of?
Well, corporal punishment is not against the law. Mm-hmm. Excessive corporal punishment is. Mm-hmm. So quite often the marker that we use is whether a mark has been left on a child.
Okay.
Whether you took an instrument to the child. It depends on where in the body. So if you had a 2-year-old that you swatted at the bottom and there was no mark left, that's not abuse. If you had an older child that you punched in the face and busted a lip, that is likely to be abuse. And I say likely because everything depends on the circumstances surrounding the case. You know, you have to take into account the age of the child. You have to take into account the circumstances that it occurred. You have to take into account whether this is the first time that anything that's happened, whether the parent has been under a lot of stress at the time, what we know about the parents, what we know about where they live. There's a lot of things that go into making that determination. But if, for example, what was okay when I was a child, taking a strap to a child and leaving marks, for example, that definitely would be abuse and neglect today.
So standards change. There are things that probably were fine in the past, but today would definitely get you in some trouble with the government.
Absolutely.
Is there anything in place to protect a parent from, let's say a child is vengeful, let's say a child is feeling, you know, spiteful, and they let's say the child makes up a story. Is that something that could happen? And if it does happen, what is there in place to protect the parent who's in a situation like that?
Well, I don't know if there's anything to protect the parent, but it does occur. And that's where attorneys come in to try and find out what the truth of the matter is, whether there was a reason behind this being said, whether a child had been punished or something had been taken away or privilege had, you know, or the child was jealous, or there was somebody new in the family that the child didn't like. I mean, there is a lot of things. Human nature, I don't have to tell you, is very complicated. So all those things come into play when a child says, there was a time when we all believed that children never lied. Okay, that was kind of, the child said something, the child would lie. Well, we know that not to be true. But it's more difficult to prove that a child is lying than not. Depends on whether the story is consistent. It depends on whether the story is verbatim repeated over and over again. That's a sign that it may not. If it's consistent, it may be true. But if it's verbatim the same thing, you start wondering whether there was another person that said certain things, because those are the same things that are repeated over and over again.
So if DYFUS, if DCP&P, DYFUS gets involved in a family, what are some of the powers that this institution has? Are they able to, force a person to take classes? Are they able to, force them to do certain things? What are some of the powers that this institution has?
There's a lot that can be done under these cases by the division. The biggest thing that they can do is that they can take your child away from you.
Wow.
If they believe that child is at risk, they can remove the child from your care.
Wow.
That is a right that a parent has, that short of the death penalty, I can't think, terminating somebody's parental rights is probably the next best, biggest thing that could happen to a person. But not all cases get to the point of termination of parental rights. Not all cases are the removal of the children. The division sometimes, when it comes in, it asks for what's known as a safety protection plan. Mm-hmm. And a safety protection plan is, for example, if the division, let's say there are two parents and the division believes that maybe one of the parents is involved and the other parent can protect the child, maybe they say, well, we're going to leave the child here, but you have to make sure that the child is in your presence at all time within a sight and sound. Okay? The safety protection plan may include another relative coming to the house to make sure that child is okay and leaving the child in the home. Or it may mean, if the parents are separated, that the child is not going to go with the other parent if it's the non-custodial parent, the one that's the caregiver. Sometimes the division may place the child with the non-custodial parent if they think that the custodial parent is the perpetrator of the abuse. Or they could allow the child to remain in the home and provide services in the home, depending on what the nature of the allegations are. And the services can range from substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, parenting classes, all these things can be provided. However, having said that, and knowing that the agency is there to provide all these services, unless there are issues of abuse and neglect and the parent agrees with these services, the division and the government should not be involved in your life. Mm. And that's where attorneys come in to make sure that if services are being offered, that the services are offered because they are necessary, not because they went out and there's a boilerplate and we're going to do a psychological and we're going to do a substance abuse evaluation, even though there's no allegations of substance abuse. That the services that are being offered are services that are needed. And most parents don't know whether these services are needed. And the experience of attorneys that have been doing this for a long time will say, why they're asking for a substance abuse evaluation if there's no allegations of that anywhere.
You bring up a good point about the substance abuse evaluation. That made me think of something. So we know that morals are changing. There are things that are tolerable today that in the past would not be tolerable. So the scenario I'm thinking about is, I can imagine before marijuana was viewed as it's being viewed today, I can imagine in the past, someone making an accusation that someone is using marijuana while they're taking care of a child. In the past, I could see that being a major issue. In your opinion, is marijuana still a major issue when it comes to the division in children?
Well, I don't know if it's a major issue, but it still is an issue. Mm-hmm. Because we have access not to medical marijuana. So if it's medical marijuana that a parent is taking for some medical reasons that it's prescribed by a doctor, that's one thing. If a parent is using marijuana and self-medicating, and it's it's something purchased on the street, not with a medical marijuana license, then it's a different situation. It depends on the age of the children. Okay. It depends on whether this is being done while the children are in the parents' care. So, for example, if it's the same, falls into the same category as excessive drinking. Okay. You can go ahead and have a glass of wine with your children. There's nothing wrong with that. You can have 2 glasses of wine. You can have a drink. If the call comes in that you're inebriated to the point that you cannot care for the children, or that you're driving while intoxicated, all those are different complications, and it depends on the age of the child. Okay. But if that call came in that you were drunk and the child was at the in-laws for the weekend,
different.
That's okay. Okay. That's okay. Because it's not against the law to get drunk and be at home. But if the child was in your care and you had an infant and you were both passed out, then that's a different situation. Okay. But that's why it's important to have somebody guide you through it, because each situation is completely different.
And it's possible that you can, if you don't have legal representation, you can possibly jeopardize your case, because if someone comes in and say, are you smoking marijuana? And you say yes, without making sure that you let them know that, hey, this is legal marijuana with a prescription for a disease, you can potentially make a bad situation worse.
Yeah. And the marijuana falls into the same category as other narcotic drugs. You could be taking Percocet because you broke a leg and the doctor gave it to you for a period of days. On the other hand, if you're taking Percocet that you're purchasing on the street because you have an addiction, then that's a different situation. If you're dealing with a 6-month-old, it's not the same situation as you're dealing with a 16-year-old. Because you have to link the use with the harm to the child.
Absolutely.
It's not only the use, it's the use and the harm or the likelihood of harm to the child.
So one question I'll ask you is that right now we're all experiencing coronavirus, right? If it wasn't for coronavirus, I think we'd be closer to each other, having a more personal interview. But one thing that everyone's talking about is this vaccine that's coming up, this potential vaccine, this vaccine that people are working on. If a parent refuses to vaccinate their child for whether it's their religious beliefs, whether it's their political beliefs, is that something where the government can inject themselves in that person's life to say, hey, we all agree that this vaccine is good, and I guess essentially force a parent to vaccinate their child or else risk losing their child? Is that something that could potentially happen in your opinion?
I don't know, because the issue of vaccination is not a new issue. We have anti-vaxxers, as they're known, that they don't want to vaccinate their children right now for the vaccines that are available. I don't know whether coronavirus will fall into a category that's different than the measles or the mumps or smallpox or polio or any of those vaccines that we currently have. I think that we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. I think it would not be unreasonable for some parents to say, I want to wait a little bit before I vaccinate my child. Depends on what's going to happen with the schools, because a lot of things have like a chain effect. If the children are not vaccinated, will they be able to enroll in school? If they don't go to school, are they being homeschooled? And I think schooling now has taken on a completely different perspective than we had before. Homeschooling was pretty much frowned upon unless we had people that knew how to homeschool. I mean, if you didn't have an education yourself, how are you going to homeschool your children? Well, we've seen that during the pandemic, we've had to homeschool our children.
Absolutely.
So I think all these things are fluctuating, and they're changing, and I think we have to stay on top of all of this and figure out how things will be seen as we go along.
Okay. And if DCP&P gets called on a family, a member, and let's say this person now refuses to cooperate. Let's say they're obstinate, they say that this is unfounded, and they refuse to cooperate. What are some potential things that can happen then? I think we touched on it, but I'd like to go into a little more detail.
What most likely will happen is that they will if they have reason to believe that the child is abused and they cannot complete their investigation, they will go into court and obtain what's known as an order to investigate. The court will review the allegations that are being made. The parent will go into court also, but will be noticed of the court date. The parent, well, nobody goes into court right now, so I know this. This is current information we're giving. Under normal circumstances, the parent will go in. If not, I'm sure that it will be done the same way that we're doing this right now. But the court will take a look at what the allegations are and find out why the parent doesn't want to participate and cooperate, and will make a decision whether or not the investigation needs to be completed. The division does not have discretion if they believe that a child has been abused not to follow through. They're mandated by law to follow through on it. But their job is to bring it to court. Now, if the judge says, you know what, I don't think there's any merit to this. And when I was a sitting judge, I had plenty of orders to investigate that I denied. Because when I looked at it, I said, no, this is you're in the middle of a divorce, and this is the 15th phone call that's made to the division. Or no, this is a neighbor that's not doing it, or no, the parent may bring other information to the court to let the court know, look, this kid is okay. I don't want you talking to my child about this because. So a court may very well deny the order to investigate, in which case, at that point, that ends. The division is out of your life. But that's why it's really important to have an attorney at that order to investigate, because you want to know what it is that you're going to let the court know.
Being that this is a court situation, this is a legal situation, we know that, I know that many people watching this are familiar with people making objections. People are familiar with hearsay. When it comes to a situation where DCP&P is involved, what is the judge allowed to consider? Is the judge allowed to consider gossip, someone who's hearing it from a third party? What are the things that a judge is allowed to consider in a situation where DYFUS or DCP&P might be involved?
DCP&P allows certain statements to come in that do not normally come in under other circumstances. Corroborated statements of children come in. Okay? The statute allows for a corroborated statement of a child to come in that would otherwise not come in. Certified records come in from a number of different places that are done in the normal course of business. So a hospital record may come in without having to bring anybody else in to testify. So there was a term that we used to use for certain type of practice of law. We could say that the children in court law is a boutique type of law, because there are certain nuances that you want to have somebody that knows DCP&P and is aware of how to handle these cases. I've had parents represent themselves, and I have to tell you that in all the years, which were, I guess, almost about 30 years, very few did a good job of representing themselves because they didn't really understand what needed to be presented. You get personally involved, you get emotionally involved, which is very understandable, and you miss the boat.
Absolutely.
Of what the court needs to know.
As a former judge, have you ever interviewed a child, just you and the child in private?
Yes. I'm not sure how it's done now because things have changed. The attorneys that are practicing are the ones that are more familiar with it.
Mhm.
But I have interviewed many children in chambers. And the procedure that certainly was followed then was that questions were asked by the attorneys. They gave me the questions. I asked. They heard the interview of the child, and then they gave me any further questions for me to ask, and I asked anything further that I deemed appropriate.
Wow. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
this was
And other children are not that easy to talk to. So you have to have a way of talking to children, and sadly, not everybody has that touch to talk to children and get them to open up.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So this was very productive. I think that we really did a good job giving people an introduction to DCP&P, people who may not be familiar with it, right? And I think that we really made it clear that this is not simple, and this is a situation where having competent legal representation is definitely going to make a difference, because
Absolutely.
there's a lot of risk.
And you know, when this goes out, if people have questions, and when saying that they have questions, I don't mean specifically as to their case, because we can't really do that. But if there are general questions, they can certainly present it, and we certainly can do follow-up conversations like this to answer some of the most asked questions, so to speak, about how the system works.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. You're quite welcome.